At the heart of uptown Charlotte stands an intersection that has shaped the city for nearly 2 centuries, Trade and Tryon. So from this crossroad, the city has divided now into 4 wards, a blueprint that defined who lived where, who had power, and who was left out. So over time, those lines told a bigger story, one of progress, displacement, renewal, and identity. And today we're going to walk through the history of Charlotte's 4 wards, how they began, what was lost, and how they continue to shape the Queen City today. I want to welcome you into Local Roots. I'm Alicia Barnes, and you're watching Queen City News Plus. We appreciate you logging on and streaming with us today. I have 2 amazing guests. I want to introduce them to you now. We have Dr. Tom Hanchett, and of course, he is with History South. Dr. Hanchett, you've been kind of a regular on Local Roots. I feel like your expertise is it's amazing how you give us this history, and it's easy to retain and learn. So I want to thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
And also we have Mayor Pro Tem Dante Anderson. Dante, I am so excited that you're here today because you were born and raised here in the Queen City. A lot of people don't know that, but you give us an interesting perspective, too, of what you've seen over history. So I want to welcome you in and let everybody know as we learn the 4 wards here that make up the uptown area. I call this show The Four Corners of Charlotte, the story of the wards. So as we prepare to show you a map as to what it looks like of these 4 wards, Dr. Hanchett, kind of take us through and walk us through how we got here.
Well, a ward is an election district. And when Charlotte was a little bitty city before the railroads came in the 1850s, they just had one ballot box, right in the middle of town at the courthouse or the city hall or whatever. 1851, the railroads were arriving. Charlotte was starting to really grow, and let's have 2 election districts. After the Civil War, 1869, many more people voting. Charlotte was growing, but also for the first time, African Americans and a lot of blue-collar white folks can vote. And so 4 districts, 4 wards, 1869, splitting along Trade Street and Tryon Street. And if you think about that, the whole city went just about as far out as the current I-277 loop. And so there are the wards. Now, we'll talk later about how they went away for a while, but people still remember that. First Ward Elementary School is in First Ward. It's also where the basketball arena is. Second Ward, off a black neighborhood for parts of its history, but today the Government Center, the new Medical College, the NASCAR Hall of Fame. Third Ward is where the football stadium is. Fourth Ward is where Discovery Place is. And part of that was Charlotte's very first designated historic district. So a lot of history in those 4 wards.
Dante, as you have now grown up here in the Charlotte area and you learned about the 4 wards, obviously, kind of take us through your thought process. What do people need to know?
Absolutely. So, when I was a kid, we called that intersection of Trade and Tryon the square, right? And it was at that time, all of the CATS buses stopped right there on the square. So that's where people would go. It was really a transportation hub, if you will, for the city, and lots of stores and shops, etc. It wasn't until the banks came and Hugh McCall really came and started to shape the uptown more that the buses were moved over to the transit center that now exists. So it was a bustling part of the city, very much an intersection. And when I was a young person, I used to go uptown and I took the CATS bus out of the 4 corners to school as a kid. And so it was also like people would go to the square just to hang out and see what was going on, right? So it really was the heartbeat of the city. And of course, my family grew up in Second Ward. They grew up in Brooklyn. Both my aunts graduated from Second Ward High School. And so many of the photos that you just showed, I have deep connection to it because, Second Ward was a neighborhood where everyone lived together, whether you worked for solid waste, whether you were a doctor, whether you were a teacher. It was the neighborhood for all African Americans. So it was a lot of mix of income and very much a center for everyone that was African American years ago. So the history of that area is so important for us to make sure that we protect.
When did you start to notice the change of, is a different feel now.
Yes. Well, as I mentioned, it was a mix of every socioeconomic status. And so when you began to get some folks who began to move out into other neighborhoods because they had acquired prominence and wealth, then it was less of a mix, right? And so right before urban renewal, it was sort of looked upon as a blight, unfortunately, on the city's history and the proximity to uptown. And that was largely because a lot of middle class African Americans started moving out to other neighborhoods.
Dr. Hanchett, kind of go a little deeper with us and kind of set the stage too as to the time frame that we're talking about, the time period, what year, location, things like that.
Let me go back in time because your talk about the square, Trade and Trine Street, where the wards came together. When I came in 1981, that was still really happening because the transit center hadn't pulled that energy away. If you went to the square, there was the picture man. You remember a picture man guy with a bowler hat?
Yes.
He was living
Really?
pictures of people and then selling the pictures to them and their friends. First place I ever
actually did a story on him. On Picture Man. If not, I need to be able to find him. But that real quick too, that's also how you know if you're from Charlotte when somebody says the square, I'm assuming.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
All right.
absolutely. Yeah.
And that's the first place I ever heard hip hop music.
Really?
There was a record store back when record stores were only at the mall. And here was one right in the middle, and they had music going all the time, and you'd found new stuff. And
Wow.
there was this kind of music that had a lot of beat to it and a lot of words to it. And it got my attention. It was great.
But people would be dancing uptown as well, during the breakdancing era.
Yeah.
And it's funny because now a lot of the uptown residents say, we need more retail, right? We need more shops. But back then, there was so much retail. There were a lot of clothing stores where families would actually make custom-made suits.
Pushback clothing.
Yep. Ice cream shops, record stores, because it was a transportation hub, there was just so much to support that. And it's just a lot of energy where people would go to, very much like a Times Square, if you will, if you ever been in New York City. So with all that came characters like the Picture Man and like other characters that would just dress up. And it was like a bit of entertainment up there.
National Hat Shop was the place to get your
Yes.
Oh, anyway, rolling the clock back a little bit more, let's go back to the late 19th century when the wards were a new thing. Initially, there was not that much difference between the different parts of Charlotte. We're still in the I-277 loop, and we're in the decades after the Civil War. Every neighborhood had white folks. Every neighborhood had black folks. There were people who were business owners. There were people who were manual laborers. And that really starts to sort out around 1900. I wrote a book about that called Sorting Out the New South City. And part of the deal was the new streetcars, which took people who could afford it out to the burbs. Burbs were a new thing. How do you get people who had previously walked for free where they were going to get on a streetcar and go out to Dilworth. Or Plaza Midwood, one of those distant places? Well, they marketed them as exclusive neighborhoods. And so the new neighborhoods around the outside of what's now 277 had deed restrictions in them. This property shall be used only for residents of the white race. And also minimum house costs. And so not even all white folk could live out in the suburbs. But that's the point at which the four wards started to differentiate.
What year are we talking about here?
Around 1900.
Okay.
Around 1900, that's the big change. And that's when the neighborhood of Brooklyn now began to develop a Black Main Street. There was the Afro-American Mutual Insurance Company. Churches, schools, and the building that's still there is the Mecklenburg Investment Company building, a cooperative Black-owned retail office, and then on the third floor, Lodge Hall. And so the notion of this vibrant Black neighborhood, which seems like it had always been there, really came into being about 1900 or so.
We're going to take a quick break right now. We have so much to be able to dive in on the other side of this break. We hope you stay with us. Welcome back to Local Roots. We're talking about the 4 wards here in the Queen City. Dr. Hanchett, we just spoke about kind of you guys setting the tone as to how we got here. Take us and pick us up from where we are in the 1900s.
Early 1900s, that's when the exclusive suburbs happen around the edge of the city. In the center city, the Brooklyn neighborhood, Second Ward, that's today where the medical college is, the aquatic center, the government center, all of that became the center of Black life. And other neighborhoods, other parts of the center city, all of them had some Black and some white folks. But if you went to First Ward, that was probably the most mixed of the neighborhoods.
Okay.
Second Ward, largely Black. Third Ward has a railroad going through the middle of it. It's where the Panther Stadium is today. And over time, because of the railroad, there was a big junkyard there. It was not seen as a particularly elite place. Fourth Ward, which was much less cut by highways and such, did become somewhat upscale. And when Charlotte finally designated a historic district in 1976 or so, it focused on the old Victorian houses in Fourth Ward.
Mayor Pro Tem, I love saying that, Dante, you kind of laid out the feel that you had when you were younger, the memories that you have of how it was just like a vibrant, bustling area in this area. What was it like in terms of relationships between cultures? And was that divided along these wards? If you can just kind of give me some insight there.
Yes, it was a bit divided. As the doctor just said, Third Ward was more industrial, probably because of the proximity to rail. So it was, more warehouses, more businesses focused on industry. It wasn't really a place where a lot of people lived and populous compared to second or first ward. Right.
So that's the Third Ward. Okay.
Yeah, that's Third Ward. First Ward, and this begins to happen later on as well, but First Ward was a mix of cultures. And then you had the connectivity across Davidson into Belmont, where Belmont was like one of the suburban neighborhoods right outside of the 4 wards. And it was a mixed neighborhood as well. And over time, it became heavy African American.
It started out as people who worked in the mills along the railroad.
Yes.
And then when Brooklyn got torn down in the 60s, which we'll need to talk about, that's when Black folks started to move into the Belmont-Villa Heights area.
Absolutely. And so now you're seeing more of a mix in that neighborhood.
Okay.
But certainly First and Second Ward, I think, were the most visited, most visible. And Fourth Ward was sort of a prominent area. And it was a place where, and I don't know, Doctor, you have to tell me what was the impetus of this, but for Uptown, Fourth Ward was the very first ward that began to get high-end townhomes. A lot of them are historical now over there, and have these high-end apartments that were proximate to jobs that were uptown. And you didn't see that happen really in Second or First Ward, but Fourth Ward had that population. I don't know why that was.
Well, I think it's because the Victorian houses survived into the 1970s. And the 70s is when Charlotte finally said, well, maybe we do have some history stuff that we shouldn't tear down. And neighborhood folks started to organize in the Fourth Ward. Dennis Rash is someone who was affiliated with Bank of America. What's now Bank of America, helped get some mortgage money there. I remember Barbara Nail, who was a radio personality here, a jazz host on public radio, and her family had grown up in Fourth Ward, African American. And so the thing that I remember in my coming to Charlotte in the 1980s was the new frontier for young folks who were moving into the city. Harvey Gantt building a new house there, becoming Charlotte's first Black mayor. His campaign manager, Mel Watt, next door, who was eventually head of the Congressional Black Caucus.
Yeah.
But when I came to town, he was just a young guy who, wanted to make things happen.
Take me through the 60s, kind of when you're in the civil rights era of what was going on here in Charlotte, and also how that relates to the second ward of Brooklyn Village and how kind of all of that came to be.
Mm.
I know it's a lot. I mean, it's a lot of history to try and wrap up, but just so people can kind of understand why we talk about the second ward, I feel like more than any of the wards.
Mm-hmm.
Well, part of it is because what folks did to it was not very pretty. The 60s we think of as the decade when civil rights blossomed and opportunity grew, and there's some truth to that for sure. Harvey Gantt comes out of city council in that period, becoming the black mayor. But that was the era when big government projects mowed down particularly black neighborhoods, working class white neighborhoods in every American city. Program called urban renewal, sometimes called slum clearance. They didn't have to ask permission particularly. You could just go in and declare eminent domain. And Brooklyn, 1,000 families displaced, 200 businesses shut down, a dozen churches kicked out. And this happened in every American city. But when you think of today, our sensitivities are, I hope, different than that. And there is a considerable honor being given to the Brooklyn Village development, which is trying to revitalize.
You can get a sense of that too when you talk to people here in Charlotte. They're very proud.
Yeah.
You know, I grew up in the Brooklyn Village, or I grew up in the area. I grew up in Second Ward. And that's what piqued my interest really about learning about the wards, because you'd hear people say, oh, I grew up in the Second Ward.
Right.
And I didn't know why they didn't talk about the First Ward or Third Ward or Fourth Ward. But now that makes sense, especially when you're telling me that the industrial part of it and kind of the landscape of it. And just the simple fact that a ward is an election district. I mean, I think that fact right there kind of allows you to understand, okay, so this is how you vote. And that makes a difference.
And there was some sense of pride coming from certain wards, right? So it's interesting because you have that photo, the famous photo of the young boys sitting on the sideline and they're watching Brooklyn get decimated, right? It's a photo that is in several of the museums here. But I think that pride that people had of being a graduate of Second Ward High School, growing up in that community, and being proximate to other people that were in a different socioeconomic status, just gave you some sense of pride. So even now today, you know,
with the gym,
they have the gym, and there's an organization, a Second Ward organization of alumni, and they work very hard to keep the history going. They have some really great artifacts in that gym. So it's definitely something I think that people work hard and really lean into. Even our new medical center, the Pearl, has an homage to Second Ward inside of the building with photos and some history there. So there's definitely some leaning in to support the history of that area. But Doctor, you said a really good, interesting thing about when the streetcars came, and then you had, of course, these neighborhoods that are all in my district, by the way. So Plaza Midwood and Dilworth, and they have these covenants in their deeds. But Dilworth is actually our very first, if you think about it, as our very first carless community.
Streetcar suburb.
Because the streetcar was the way that people got around, public transportation. So many of the beautiful homes in the Dilworth community do not have driveways at all. But it goes back to that history of it was the streetcar suburb. It was a public transportation neighborhood. So there was no real need for the driveways.
That makes so much sense.
Yeah.
What a good transition. So much more to come on Local Roots. We're going to continue in just a moment after this break. Welcome back to Local Roots. I'm Alicia Barnes. You're watching Queen City News Plus. We're going to talk about now the 4 wards and why the wards went away. Dr. Hanchett, you want to start us off?
Well, a ward is an election district, remember, and what begins to happen in the early 1900s and continues till the Civil Rights Movement is an erosion of Black voting power. And the deed restrictions are part of that. But in 1917, folks moved from having district representation in which each neighborhood has a say to a world in which there are only at-large elections. So what? Well, you have to have time, you have to have money and able to run for the whole city. Some of us can do that. But that knocked out a lot of Black power. And so as the civil rights movement begins to heat up in the 60s, one of the big aims is to get back to districts, because districts allow people with diverse voices a little bit of a platform, and they get into the political process. And that's what we got in 1977. And the first time that there was an election after the shift to district and at-large, which is what we have now, city council was almost half female for the first time ever. It was about a quarter African-American, reflecting the population, for the first time ever. And very soon, Harvey Gantt is Charlotte mayor. And following him is a woman. First time we had a woman mayor, Sue Myrick, who is Republican, conservative. And so it's not just, opening up politics for a certain group, but the shift to the districts and at large opens up politics for many of us.
So, Mayor Pro Tem, I want you to be able to kind of tackle this as to where we are now in 2025 as we move forward, because what you described is what you felt growing up, that community. We still have community here, but it's a different sense of it. Whereas where you grew up, it was more of that sense of, hey, everybody knew each other. You kind of came together. And I do want to point out, too, it makes sense now that why when I go to festivals in Uptown, you see a lot of the dancing.
Yes.
I never knew why that was such a big thing, but maybe that was kind of a throwback to what it was like years ago. But bring us up to speed in 2025. We're seeing a lot of change.
We are. We're seeing incredible change and also densification in Uptown, I would say, more than we've ever seen, right? And so you have a lot of people who actually, so Uptown is an epicenter for business, but it's also for distinct neighborhoods. And we mentioned Third Ward and its history. Well, the Third Ward community is actually, they've just recently reorganized their neighborhood association.
The Third Ward.
Third Ward. And they're trying to bring, to your point about never hearing about them, they're trying to bring their history forward as how their neighborhood was established and create identity.
What specific roads are we talking about when we say Third Ward, just so people can understand, if we can show the map again as to the areas?
Sure. So Third Ward is where Romare Bearden Park is. And the Bank of America Stadium. And so if you think of that, once you cross over Tryon into those areas between Trade and Tryon, that is Third Ward. So, but even now, so as we think about the development of Uptown, we have to think about the residents who are there and how they can build community across the neighborhood lines, right? In the midst of an economic epicenter, right? Which is really interesting to do. And you mentioned the festivals, and every time there's a festival there, I think you get that sense of a family and community because it's bringing so many people together, whether it's, the Indian Asian Community Festival, which I was recently at, the Pride Festival, which is one of the largest ones in the country. You have people coming together and just being out and enjoying themselves.
Right, and learning Charlotte.
Right. And so I think that's an important element, is to bring the vibrancy back to Uptown across the board.
Dr. Hanchett, any resources you can let people know that are very important? Your books are fabulous. I mean, they are so well researched. They're very easy to read, very easy to understand. But any resources for people to understand the four wards, kind of where we are today? I just think learning your history is just so important.
Look up the Carolina Room of the Charlotte Mecklenburg Library. They are not currently open to the general public for walk-in because they're building a new library downtown. But the Carolina Room of the Public Library is a place that I visit online all the time. There are some wonderful books besides my books. This is Legacy, the story of Black Charlotte. We talked about urban renewal. This is a book by a minister here in Charlotte, Reverend Greg Jarrell, looking at urban renewal in Charlotte. And so Charlotte tends to think it doesn't have any history. We got history.
Yes. that legacy of Black history is also written by a D1 resident.
Pamela Gray.
It's a really, really great book.
Mm.
It's a quick read, but really good. I can tell you when my mother passed away and a couple of my siblings passed away, I was sort of thirsty for the knowledge that you were talking about. I wanted to know more about Second Ward High School and things of that nature. And I went, Doctor, to the Carolina Room, and they have microfiche. They have all of the legacy Charlotte Observer articles, and you can just go and spend a couple hours there and dig into whatever topic you want to. So that's a really great resource. I will also say that there are a ton of documentaries online, PBS, and even on YouTube, where you can sort of dive into some of these documentaries.
That's actually how I
history.
found Dr. Tom Hanchett.
Yes, yeah. So those are great resources. You don't even have to leave your house,
Right.
but just tapping into those, some really great, thoughtful documentaries out there.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tom Hanchett. I just love saying your name. Let me know any final thoughts here for people to be able to know as we close out this episode of Local Roots.
Charlotte's a city of newcomers. You might think that we don't care about history. We just have had so much growth over so many decades that it's hard to find the stories unless you find the people. And so that's why Local Roots here is something that I'm really excited about.
I too. I thank you so much. Thanks for being here. Thanks for watching Queen City News Plus. Dr. Tom Hanchett and Dante Anderson, Mayor Pro Tem. Just thank you so much for sharing your personal experiences and also history for us all to learn together. You're watching Queen City News Plus. I'm Alicia Barnes. Thanks for logging on.
Queen City News Plus. Just search Queen City News on your smart TV's app store.